What if the food you've been calling Mexican your entire life was never Mexican at all? What if the dishes you associate with ancient Aztec markets and sun-baked villages in Oaxaca were actually born in places like Lebanon, Spain, or even the American Midwest? And what if the real story, the actual origin, was so surprising that it made you question everything you thought you knew about the world on your plate? Here at Dish Atlas, that's exactly the kind of story we live for. And today we're pulling back the curtain on 10 beloved foods that the world has claimed as Mexican and revealing where they actually came from. If this is the kind of history that makes you see the world differently, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for all 10. Food number 1, tacos al pastor. Walk through any Mexican city after midnight, and the smell hits you before you even see it. Smoky caramelized pork, slowly rotating on a vertical spit, shaved thin, piled onto a warm corn tortilla with a sliver of pineapple on top. It feels ancient. It feels Mexican to the bone. But that vertical spit, that's a shawarma machine. And it came from Lebanon. In the early 20th century, waves of Lebanese and Syrian immigrants arrived in Mexico, particularly in the state of Puebla, bringing with them the tradition of shawarma al-Arabi. Thinly sliced lamb stacked and roasted on a rotating vertical skewer. Mexican cooks watched, learned, and then did what great cooks always do. They made it their own. They swapped lamb for pork, replaced the Middle Eastern spices with dried chilies and achiote. And somewhere along the way, someone added a crown of pineapple that changed everything. The dish that now defines Mexican street food was born from the hunger and ingenuity of immigrants searching for belonging in a new country. It is in every beautiful sense a recipe for reinvention. Food number 2, nachos. Few foods feel more tied to a culture than nachos. The crispy, cheese-smothered, jalapeno-loaded plate that shows up at every Mexican restaurant from Mexico City to Manchester. Most people assume it's a dish with deep Mexican roots, something passed down through generations of abuelitas in the Yucatan. It is not. Nachos were invented in 1943 by a man named Ignacio Nacho Anaya in a small border town called Piedras Negras, just across the Rio Grande from Eagle Pass, Texas. A group of American military wives from a nearby U.S. air base arrived at his restaurant after hours hungry with almost nothing left in the kitchen. So Nacho grabbed some tortilla chips, melted cheese over them, threw on some pickled jalapenos, and served them. He called the dish Especiales de Nacho, Nacho Specials. Here's the part that stops people cold. Nachos weren't invented as Mexican food. They were invented for Americans out of desperation on the literal border between two countries. That thin line between cultures is exactly where the dish was born. And it's been blurring borders ever since. What started as a last-minute improvisation is now a billion-dollar stadium staple eaten by millions of people who have never once questioned where it came from. Food number 3, burritos. The burrito is one of the most recognizable Mexican exports on the planet. A warm flour tortilla wrapped tight around rice beans, meat, and cheese. Eaten standing up, eaten on the go, eaten by people who feel like they're holding something ancient and authentic in both hands. That feeling is real. The history, though, is complicated. The burrito as the world knows it today, that oversized foil-wrapped, stuffed-to-bursting cylinder, was largely shaped not in Mexico City, but in San Francisco's Mission District in the 1960s. A man named Fabronio Ontiveros is widely credited with popularizing the Mission-style burrito at his restaurant El Faro in 1961, loading flour tortillas with generous portions of rice beans and meat in a format that Mexico itself barely recognized. Here's the surprising part. In most of Mexico, burritos are still considered a northern regional specialty, primarily from the state of Chihuahua, and the massive rice-stuffed version that dominates American culture is largely unknown south of the border. Ask for a Mission burrito in Mexico City and you'll get a confused look. The burrito became a global icon not by staying true to its roots, but by crossing a border and being completely reimagined by the immigrant hands that fed a hungry city. That's not a dilution of culture. That's how food survives. Food number 4, chimichangas. If the burrito was shaped by immigration and reinvention, the chimichanga was born from something far more gloriously human. A complete accident, followed by a very good decision. The chimichanga, that golden, deep-fried, impossibly crunchy burrito that anchors Tex-Mex menus across America, is almost certainly not Mexican in origin. The most widely accepted story traces it to Tucson, Arizona in the 1920s. Monica Flynn, the founder of the legendary El Charro Cafe, the oldest continuously operating Mexican restaurant in the United States, accidentally dropped a burrito into a deep fryer. She reportedly started to shout a Spanish curse word before catching herself and substituting chimichanga, a nonsense exclamation roughly equivalent to thingamajig. What makes this story almost too perfect to believe is that it's almost certainly true. El Charro Cafe has been serving chimichangas since the 1920s, and the dish never appeared in any traditional Mexican regional cookbook before that. It is at its core an American-born food wearing a Spanish name. Crispy on the outside, warm and rich on the inside, and completely unrecognized in the interior of Mexico. A dropped burrito and a half-swallowed curse word gave the world one of its most beloved comfort foods. Sometimes, the best things in life really are accidents. Food number 5, fajitas. There are few things in a restaurant more theatrical than a sizzling cast-iron skillet of fajitas arriving at your table. The steam rising, the peppers and onions caramelized to a deep, golden sweetness, the strips of grilled meat catching the light. It feels like a celebration. It feels like Mexico. But the fajita's true birthplace is a stretch of dusty ranch land along the Texas-Mexico border, and its origins are rooted not in celebration, but in survival. Fajitas were born in the cattle ranches of South Texas in the 1930s and 1940s. Created by Mexican vaqueros cowboys who were paid partly in beef, but received only the cuts nobody else wanted. The skirt steak, a tough, stringy, heavily worked muscle from the diaphragm of the cow, was considered throwaway meat. The vaqueros marinated it, grilled it over open fire, and sliced it thin against the grain. The word fajita literally means little belt in Spanish, a reference to the shape of that skirt steak cut. The stunning fact is that fajitas didn't appear on a restaurant menu until 1969, when Sonny Falcon, a meat market manager in Kyle, Texas, began selling them at outdoor events. A dish born from poverty and necessity became one of the most ordered items in American dining history. What the vaqueros knew that the most overlooked cut can become the most beloved is a truth that extends far beyond the kitchen. Food number 6, yellow cheese queso. Walk into any Tex-Mex restaurant in America, and the first thing that hits the table is a bowl of warm, silky, pale yellow queso dip. Smooth as velvet, just thick enough to coat a chip, with a heat that builds slowly at the back of your throat. It feels like the most natural thing in the world alongside a plate of enchiladas. But that specific queso, the liquid-processed American cheese-based dip that millions of people associate with Mexican cuisine, was never part of Mexican food culture at all. Traditional Mexican cheese is almost nothing like what gets served in that bowl. Mexico has a rich tradition of fresh, crumbly, and aged cheeses. Queso fresco cotija Oaxaca and anejo. Cheeses with character and complexity. The smooth, melted yellow queso dip is a product of American processed cheese technology pioneered by James L. Kraft, who patented processed cheese in 1916. Somewhere in the kitchens of Texas in the early 20th century, that processed cheese met chilies and cumin, and a Tex-Mex staple was born. Here's what makes it remarkable. The dish that Americans most associate with Mexican restaurants doesn't exist in the same form anywhere in Mexico. Order it there, and you'll be met with genuine bewilderment. Queso dip is a love letter written in one culture's handwriting sealed with another culture's ingredients, and somehow it became comfort food for an entire continent. Food number 7, cinnamon and Mexican hot chocolate. Close your eyes and picture a mug of Mexican hot chocolate. Dark, rich, slightly grainy, fragrant with warm cinnamon, frothed by hand with a wooden molinillo, until it's thick enough to coat your lips. It feels like something the Aztecs passed down through centuries unchanged and sacred. The chocolate part, genuinely ancient Mexican. The cinnamon swirling through it that came from an island off the southeastern coast of Sri Lanka. Cinnamon is native to Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, and was one of the most valuable spices in the ancient world. Traded across Arab and European markets for centuries before it ever touched Mexican soil. It arrived in Mexico through the Spanish colonizers in the 16th century, who had developed a deep love for cinnamon through their trade networks in Asia and the Middle East. When Spanish colonizers encountered the Aztec xocolotl, a bitter, frothy ceremonial drink made from cacao, they found it unpalatable without sweetening it. They added sugar, they added cinnamon. They transformed a sacred ritual drink into something entirely new. What's extraordinary is that Mexican cinnamon canela is actually Ceylon cinnamon, the softer, more fragrant variety. While most of the world uses the harder Vietnamese or cassia type, Mexico kept the original. The colonizers accidentally preserved something precious. A spice that traveled from Sri Lanka to Spain to Mexico is now inseparable from one of the world's most beloved comfort drinks. Distance, it turns out, can be an ingredient. Food number 8, flour tortillas. If corn tortillas are the ancient soul of Mexican cuisine, patted by hand, cooked on a clay comel, eaten for thousands of years before a single European ship crossed the Atlantic, then flour tortillas are something else entirely. Softer, chewier, more pliable, with that faint, wheaty richness that makes them irresistible, warm off the griddle. Most people assume they are equally ancient, equally indigenous, equally Mexican. They are none of those things. Wheat is not native to the Americas. It arrived with Spanish colonizers in the 16th century, and flour tortillas emerged specifically in the northern Mexican states of Sonora and Chihuahua regions, where wheat cultivation took hold and where indigenous corn supplies were sometimes scarce. But the story goes even deeper than Spanish colonization. Many food historians believe that flour tortillas were significantly shaped by Sephardic Jewish communities who fled the Spanish Inquisition and settled in northern Mexico in the late 1500s, bringing with them a tradition of thin, unleavened flatbreads made from wheat flour, the fact that stops people mid-bite. The soft flour tortilla that wraps every burrito and quesadilla in America may carry a thread of Jewish culinary heritage, born from exile and survival in the high desert of northern Mexico. A flatbread born from displacement, shaped by necessity, and perfected across centuries. The flour tortilla is proof that survival has always been the most powerful recipe of all. Food number 9, Caesar salad. Few dishes carry a name more misleading than the Caesar salad. Say it out loud and most people picture ancient Rome Julius Caesar, a dish with 2,000 years of Italian heritage behind it. Others, knowing a little more confidently, claim it as Mexican. And on that second point, they are surprisingly close. But the full truth is stranger and more specific than almost anyone realizes. The Caesar salad was invented in 1924 by an Italian immigrant named Cesar Cardini in Tijuana, Mexico. Cardini ran a restaurant just across the U.S. Mexico border strategically positioned to serve Americans who crossed into Tijuana during Prohibition to eat, drink, and celebrate freely. On the 4th of July weekend of 1924, his kitchen ran dangerously low on supplies. Faced with a crowd of hungry Americans and nearly empty shelves, Cardini improvised. Romaine lettuce, olive oil, raw egg, Worcestershire sauce, lemon juice, garlic, and Parmesan. Tossed tableside with theatrical flair. Here's the detail that makes this story unforgettable. Worcestershire sauce, one of the Caesar salad's defining flavors, is itself a British condiment with origins tracing back to India. So the dish claimed by Mexico was invented by an Italian in a border town for Americans using a British sauce inspired by Indian flavors. The Caesar salad is not Mexican, not Italian, not American. It is a beautiful collision of the entire world tossed together in a bowl on a desperate holiday weekend, and it has never stopped being perfect. Food number 10, hard-shell tacos. We began this list with the taco, that most sacred symbol of Mexican street food, And we end it with the version that most of the world pictures first, the hard-shell taco. Crispy golden, snapping apart at the first bite, filled with seasoned ground beef, shredded yellow cheese, iceberg lettuce, and a dollop of sour cream. It is for hundreds of millions of people the definition of Mexican food. It is also one of the most American inventions in culinary history. The hard-shell taco as a mass-market product was commercialized by Glenn Bell, the founder of Taco Bell, who began selling them in San Bernardino, California in the 1950s. Bell had seen a version of the taco in Mexican-American restaurants, especially at Mitla Cafe, where cooks fried tortillas into a rigid folded shell that stayed crisp long enough to be filled fast and served faster. What he did was not create the taco from nothing. What he did was something more powerful. He turned a regional borderland idea into a machine. He made it repeatable, stackable, shippable. He transformed a handmade food into a format that could move through drive-throughs, strip malls, stadiums, food courts, airports, and continents. And that is where the illusion took hold. Because once a food becomes standardized, it starts to feel official. The shell looked Mexican enough. The name was Mexican. The fillings sounded Mexican to people who had never eaten in Mexico itself. So the hard-shell taco became for millions not a version of Mexican food, but the version. A whole generation grew up believing that tacos were supposed to crack like glass and rain down orange cheese with every bite. But travel through much of Mexico, and that image begins to fall apart. Traditional tacos are usually soft, warm, flexible, built for immediacy rather than durability. They are held in the hand for seconds, not engineered for shelf life. The hard shell belongs less to taquerias of Mexico than to the logic of American fast food, where speed, uniformity, and portability matter almost as much as flavor. And yet dismissing it entirely would miss the deeper point, because even the hard shell taco tells the same story every dish on this list has told. Foods move. People adapt. Recipes cross borders and become something new under new pressures. Immigration shapes them. Industry scales them. Memory softens the edges until invention starts to feel like tradition. That may be the real lesson hiding underneath all 10 of these dishes. Authenticity is rarely a frozen moment in the distant past. More often, it is a long chain of reinvention that people repeat until it feels timeless. So the next time someone points at a plate and says, "That's Mexican," the better question might be, which part of the journey are we tasting? Because behind almost every iconic food is a border, crossed a substitution, made a compromise, accepted, and a culture changed forever. And that's what makes food worth talking about in the first place at all.